Gamers. Gaming has been in a really weird spot in 2024. The big studios have been putting out stinkers, but the AAA studios and many indie studios have been putting out lots of bangers last year. In fact, most of the good games that came out this year weren't mostly from the known studios like EA, Ubisoft and alike. Well, putting good games with EA and Ubisoft in the same sentence was probably the most offensive thing I've ever said on the internet, but nonetheless you get my point. A lot of studios that had created AAA games this year were met with really underwhelming performances and lots of failures. Ubisoft is on the verge of collapsing, many studios are being shut down, and people are now starting to wake up from this false narrative that AAA games are the superior games. While there are many good games that came out from indie studios lately, I want to talk about a game that's been blowing up recently and has garnered a lot of great reception. That is MiSide, or MiSide. MiSide has shown the modern gaming industry that all it takes to be a successful game is fun, interesting, and attractive. Firstly, let's dive a little on what MiSide is. MiSide is a psychological horror adventure game that was developed by iHasto. The Steam store front page of MiSide can be misleading, as if you scroll down to see the About This Game section, you'll see that it's like an advertisement for a cute anime-style visual novel game with Mita as your girlfriend that will accompany you every day. It does not show any explicit signs of being a horror game until you see at the bottom that it said something about the intense scenes and the gore this game had, and also maybe if you looked at the tags. Maybe because of that, you'll be tricked into thinking that this game would be similar to Doki Doki Literature or Yandere Simulator. Dear God, will that game ever be done? But when you pay that money, download the game and play the game, it's a whole different experience than what you can expect. I think before the game got popular, people were expecting something along the lines of a yandere girl trying to kill you because she loves you way too much, as that premise for an anime horror game was common. But MiSide proved that it was a better and a much more interesting concept than that. I won't get into too much details on how the game and story goes right now, but it starts out by you playing as this guy who downloaded a cute anime game in your phone with Mita as the protagonist. Then you spend days on your phone playing this game. Eventually you get pulled into the Mita game world. You notice some weird creepy things. Mita asks you to stay with her in the game world. You refuse, then it's a psychological horror experience from then on. The gameplay itself, it's not like a standard run and survive type horror game, it's quite innovative because the game offers you many different gameplay elements in the game. MiSide was developed by iHasto, an indie studio that consists of two people. These two developers are called Maken Cat and Umirai. I hope I pronounced that right. Maken Cat was in charge with the game's programming and animations, while Umirai was in charge of the texture and model designer. Leading up to the game's official release on the Steam store page, the game started its development around 2022 as this per Reddit comment. I do not know if this is true, but I can't find any other information about its development. It took the game around 865 days to develop, and they only had around 30 days of rest during the development. That is insane. So it took around 2.25 years to develop the game, and it only had 2 developers working on it. I don't think you guys realized how crazy this sounds. The fact that this game was this polished, had a lot of things in it, close to 7 to 8 hours of gameplay, and the studio only had 2 developers working on it and finished it in a total of around 2 years. That's amazing. Massive props to the developers and the benevolent work that they did. Not only that, I'm sure that these 2 developers didn't have that much budget to work with in the first place too. So it's amazing how people who are very passionate about making games and know what a lot of people will find fun, interesting and attractive can create something special and successful. Their publishers were Indie Arc and Shochiku Japan. Indie Arc probably being the one who helped in investing, localization and publishing for the game. I don't know much about Indie Arc, but it looks like that a lot of their indie games are pretty well received on Steam. As for Shochiku Japan, they're probably the ones who provided the Japanese voice actor for the Mitas, Kana Hanaiwa, previously known for her role as Lilia Katsuragi in Gakuen Idolmaster. So the game does have external support from these companies, but then again, the ones who were developing and working on the game were just Maken Cat and Umirai. Despite just being 2 developers, the game was a massive success. MiSide has received massive success from everywhere. Well, they're only released on Steam as of right now, but it's a pretty hot topic in social media everywhere. It was met with praise, people were making fan arts and memes of the games, it has a large community right now, and the reviews were just immaculate. You can see it yourself on the Steam store page. It has 64,000 reviews and it's overwhelmingly positive. It's only been out for a month now. The fact that it has that many positive reviews shows the game that it was a massive success. Let's compare to the many AAA games that have been released this year. Dragon Age The Veilguard, easy target. It had half the reviews of MiSide, 32,000 versus 64,000. Whether that mostly positive reviews from the game was real or not, it still couldn't beat MiSide on Steam. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, a great game to many people, although just a fraction of MiSide's reviews. Not only that, I think it did not sell well in general. Star Wars Outlaws, another Ubisoft slop. Horrible, doesn't even need to be talked about. Okay, it makes sense that the sloppiest of the slops this year probably couldn't break 50,000 positive Steam reviews. But what about something like Metaphor ReFantazio? Pretty well received and one of, if not Atlas's best games so far. Well, Metaphor's Steam reviews suggest that it does not come close to MiSide, but that doesn't really matter because Metaphor sold 1 million copies on its first day and probably a lot of $1 million. Especially now, it definitely had more copies sold and Metaphor is a huge success, definitely. Surprisingly, MiSide had around 800,000 sales around Christmas, which was 2 weeks after its release. So it definitely broke 1 million sales by now. It was projected to be earning $9 million in 2 weeks after its release. It's as impressive as Metaphor, if I can say, because MiSide only had 2 developers working on it. I mean, it is pretty unfair to compare a lot of the games to MiSide in terms of financial success because we're basing it off Steam reviews, and those games were released on consoles as well, but I guess this is just a general base idea on how successful MiSide is. But most big and anticipated AAA titles that were released this year weren't as successful as the studios anticipated. Again, these AAA titles, Metaphor included, were developed by big studios. These AAA games were developed with a huge team, huge budget, and huge expectations to sell really well to at least break even. MiSide did not have a huge $1 million budget to develop. So I think it's safe to say that MiSide did a lot better than most AAA titles that were released this year. Adding on to that success, the game was massively praised everywhere. There are so many people that really put in the word of mouth for this game, and it was definitely a massive factor in the game's financial success. Its most popular character by far, Cappy, or we can call her Cool Mita, was everywhere on Twitter and TikTok. And if you're in the gaming space and into anime, you definitely see people posting about Cappy. If you compare to the characters that were in those AAA games, none of them, and I mean none of them, were loved as much as Cappy, and she wasn't even a main character. She was just a one-off character that you get to hang out for like 10 minutes. Not one character in Dragon Age The Veilguard was received with this much love and praise as Cappy, alongside with most characters that are in the AAA gaming space. Oh, actually, there was one character that was being talked about a lot in Dragon Age The Veilguard. It's Tash. But let's just say that Tash isn't anywhere near being genuinely liked as a character. Most of the gameplay from AAA games weren't really as polished, optimized, or innovative compared to MiSide, despite them being AAA games. There were many criticisms about the games, not only complaining about DEI. You can see the countless reviews about the new AAA titles that released this year. They weren't exactly met with praise or with the most bombastic reviews. Not only that, there are so few people that are playing these games for streaming or for content, which shows again that the games aren't doing very well and aren't really well received. Even if they were playing the game for content, they really disliked the game. Compared to MiSide, many people enjoyed it. So MiSide was definitely met with a lot of praise everywhere. The game was a success and it was beating the modern AAA gaming industry. MiSide's success boils down to a combination of being fun, interesting, and visually appealing. At its core, MiSide thrives on variety, ensuring the experience never feels stale. The game offers a wide mix of gameplay styles that seamlessly transition from one to another. You'll find yourself solving puzzles that are simple yet satisfying, running from crazy meta intense chase sequences, and even diving into entirely unexpected moments like a first-person shooter minigame similar to Quake. This diversity in gameplay elements ensures players are constantly engaged. It's rare for a game to blend so many gameplay elements without feeling disjointed, yet MiSide accomplishes this with ease. Although MiSide is rooted in the horror genre, its scares are more psychological than visceral. Unlike games like Resident Evil, which rely heavily on jump scares and oppressive atmospheres, MiSide's horror stems from its unsettling world and the tension of its narrative. Creepy moments, eerie environments, and the looming presence of danger create a sense of unease, but they're balanced by a lighter anime-inspired aesthetic. This contrast between the cute and comforting on one side and the creepy and unsettling on the other is one of the game's defining feature. Players feel at ease exploring the cute, vibrant world of the game, which only makes the horror elements hit harder when they appear. The game's ability to strike this balance is a testament to its thoughtful design and its understanding of player psychology. Characters are another standout feature of MiSide, and they play a major role in its success. Cappy in particular is a fan favorite. Her bright, bubbly personality acts as a comforting anchor in the game's darker moments, making her a character players genuinely connect with. The different variations of Mita, kind Mita, cool Mita, Mila, and even the antagonist Crazy Mita each add depth to the story. Their designs and personalities, while rooted in the same character, are distinct enough to make each one memorable. The differences between the Mitas, hairstyles, accessories, outfits, reflect their unique personalities and add layers to the narrative. For example, Crazy Mita's design with her long twin pigtails and sinister demeanor contrasts sharply with kind Mita's warm and friendly appearance, emphasizing the duality of the game's world. The story and world building of MiSide are equally compelling. The idea of being trapped in a buggy, glitched out version of the game creates a meta-narrative that resonates with the players who are familiar with the quirks of game development. The lore surrounding Crazy Mita, who was abandoned as a prototype and left to become bitter and vengeful, adds a tragic depth to her role as the antagonist. Players uncover her story piece by piece, creating a sense of discovery that drives them forward. MiSide's brilliance lies in how it weaves all these elements together. The varied gameplay keeps players entertained. The blend of horror and comfort creates a unique emotional experience, and the story and characters give it heart. By embracing its anime aesthetic and subverting traditional horror tropes, MiSide delivers an experience that's as surprising as it is memorable. MiSide is definitely a really good game. It's not really hard to see why the game is so successful. In this day and age, especially last year, there were so many DEI slops from major gaming studios. 100% that the DEI factors and implementation in the games were blocking the game's path to success. But that's just one factor. There were a lot of factors fairly common among most AAA titles in 2024 that really blocked their way to being a good game. Most AAA games are just way too unoptimized and really badly polished. They're also just way too advanced for most common people's capabilities to run it. We can take a look at the new Indiana Jones game, for example, the most graphically intense and advanced game as of right now. The minimum and recommended system requirements are insane. How many normal people do you think are running systems with an RTX 3080 Ti, 32 gigs of RAM, and an Intel Core i7 12th generation? Definitely not the normal people. A lot of people are running systems with mid-end specs, and they're definitely not RTX 3080 Ti with 32 gigs of RAM. A lot of AAA games nowadays are just way too demanding for most PCs to handle. The reason is that the games are just horribly optimized. Compared to MiSide, since it's not a AAA title, it's already guaranteed that the game will run on most PCs. The game is well optimized as most systems do not have a problem at all in running the game. Look at the system requirements. It doesn't need a beefcake of a PC to run it. The game is smooth, it plays smoothly, it looks good, and not a lot of people encounter many bugs or glitches in the game, so it's polished well. The developers made sure the game runs and plays well, despite there being only 2 developers. It shows that the studios nowadays are getting lazy in trying to make the game playable and optimized. Another problem is that modern AAA titles are just not focusing on fun, interesting, and attractiveness. Most AAA titles aren't really focusing on what will make the games fun, interesting, and visually appealing because they just forgot or something. The thing is with AAA titles is that they have a very formulaic design. They always play it very safe, they don't take risks and don't innovate enough. Being an open world, having fetch quests, characters and graphics looking realistic, and having some diversity higher is common with all AAA games. It's all so uninspiring and stale, but so many big studios always ambitiously market these AAA titles like it is something groundbreaking in the gaming industry. Big budgets and big ambitions can be very dangerous tools if you can't utilize them well. An example is the failed AAA title Star Wars Outlaws. The game was riddled with bugs, making it unplayable at times. The game lacked any customizations or different options to approach the game differently. Despite it being marketed as a huge open world Star Wars game, it lacked any quote-unquote open world, and the core mechanics of the games were just awful. Star Wars Outlaws was marketed as a game that was going to be the most grand Star Wars experience. It was certainly ambitious and obviously had a huge budget behind it, yet it fell very short of success. MiSide wasn't marketed as this groundbreaking game that will shake the horror genre for years to come. It didn't have a massive marketing campaign behind it making the game more than it should be. It just gave the people the expectation that this will be a horror anime yandere game, but it subverts their expectations in a good way. MiSide offered a lot of interesting and fun gameplay elements in just its 7 to 8 hours of gameplay. Because there weren't massive expectations, the game exceeded those expectations and gave players a much more memorable experience than a $60 to $70 game that had 40 to 80 hours of gameplay. The developers worked so hard in just making the game fun, interesting, and visually appealing. They didn't put out massive expectations on trying to make a change in the gaming industry with their game, just trying to make something that gamers will play. No weird decisions like including diversity, forcing a social message, making it something political when it shouldn't be, making the game realistic. MiSide didn't have any of that. MiSide just set out what it's supposed to do. Be a fun psychological horror game with a cute anime style aesthetic. It gave an interesting story, has visually appealing style graphics, has attractive good characters, and has fun gameplay. Surprisingly, it gave the anime horror genre a breath of fresh air because it's so innovative in what it did. That's why MiSide is beating the modern AAA gaming industry. It just focused on being fun, interesting, and visually appealing for gamers. 3 key ingredients for a game to succeed. Not any of that DEI grand experience formulaic bullshit. That is all. I'll see ya.